why are we here? Like, what is the iceberg principle, right? So as a lifetime learner, I'm always looking for new experiences that challenge me and I think just like reshape my understanding of the world around me, right? And a growth mindset is a super important one for me. And this passion is also shared by the ZayZoon team. It lives through our core value of mastery. And so what we're doing here is a virtual fireside chat where we can have unfiltered conversations with some of the most successful people on earth that have a really cool story to tell. But we've also broken the rules a little bit, and we're opening up the ZayZoon culture to the public. So there's a few select people on this call that aren't ZayZooners, but get to have a behind the curtain look at ZayZoon's conversations with some awesome people like Austen. So Austen Allred is the co-founder and CEO of Bloomtech. At the age of 23, Austen dropped out of school and decided he wanted to be in the tech industry. But he didn't just decide that he wanted to be in the tech industry and I guess got a job in the tech industry. He actually packed up his things, drove to Silicon Valley in his 2002 Honda Civic, and lived out of that car for the next 3 months while he taught himself how to code, and then finally landing himself a job. So fast forward to today, Bloomtech is an online school that offers schooling with $0 upfront tuition for the students. Students don't need to pay anything for their tuition until they have a job in the tech industry, and I believe it's make $50,000 or more. Is that correct, Austin?
Yeah, it's 50,000 is correct. Yep.
Awesome. And Bloomtech is a wild success, right? The company has raised a ton of dough, and we'll get into that story and the whole Silicon Valley darling story of Bloomtech as well. So to start out, though, I want to dive into the story of Ukraine. Um, so
Okay.
when yeah, when Austin was 19, like man, you went to Ukraine for a Mormon missionary.
Mhm.
Um, what is that? Like, expand on that a little bit, and then I think more importantly, I I want to dig into the perspective of what that gave you for like life, but then also kind of what you took into the companies. But maybe just generally give us a overview, and then we'll get specific into that area.
Yeah, for sure. So to start with, a Mormon mission. So Mormon is the nickname of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. But when you turn 19, if you're a man in the Mormon religion, you are expected to go on a mission, which is 2 years of preaching and doing service and whatever else. But it happens all over the world, and the method by which it happens is there's like an application process, and you fill it out, and they do a bunch of like physical checks, and then you basically you just get a letter in the mail one day, and so you open it up and it says, hey, you are hereby called to serve in the X mission. So you have no idea where you're going, what language you're speaking, until you open that letter. So it's kind of it's a crazy experience, as you can imagine. You could be going to Boise, Idaho. You could be going. My older brother went to India. My little brother went to Mexico City. My little sister went to Scotland. So it can be anywhere. But yeah, I opened mine up and it said the Donetsk, Ukraine mission, and no one had ever heard of Donetsk, and very few people talked about Ukraine at that time. And Russian speaking. I was up against the border with Russia, and folks there, I guess they still speak Russian. A lot of them are now speaking Ukrainian, kind of in protest of the invasion by Russia. But yeah, back then nobody had ever talked about. I'd never imagined in my wildest dreams you would see Ukrainian flags all over the U.S. It was a no-name country, and yeah, I got out there in. So you spend the first 3 months in what they call the Missionary Training Center, and some parts of Bloomtech are modeled after the MTC, the Missionary Training Center, and that's basically like depending on which language you're speaking. If you're English speaking and you're a native English speaker, it can be a couple weeks. For us, it was 3 months in the MTC of just all day and all night studying Russian, trying to get enough of a handle on the language that you can be not completely useless when you get out there, and then a little bit about here's how you teach random people on about Jesus when you run into them on the street or knock on their door. Um, so yeah, I mean, I basically showed up in Eastern Ukraine in like January of 2009, right after the financial crisis had hit, in a little mining town called Gorlovka. Um, and then, yeah, it was like 80% unemployment because the mine had shut down. All outside investment was completely gone at that point in time. And it was just a crazy couple of years. It was a fantastic experience, but it was wild.
I heard on I think it was a podcast or maybe it was a tweet or something like, you had friends in South America that were like converting people by the dozen.
Oh
And
yeah.
I think you had said that you would have been happy with like one convert, given just the landscape of like Russia and Ukraine. Um, how did you not just think like, shit, this is pointless? Like, and how I guess like I'm going to tie that to being a founder as well. Like, how did that help shape your perspective of like just going for something you believe in, I guess? And um, like, how do you stay motivated during that time? What are the little uh, tips and tricks of like the growth hacking that you use to try to convert one when, you know, it really was a difficult thing to do? I think there's some good learnings in there.
Yeah, I mean, so randomly, so I hung out with I had a soccer team of friends growing up, and it's the church is so, widespread. There are 15, 16 million members, something like that. When you show up on a mission, it's really rare that you know somebody. For some random reason, like five of my six best friends all got called to Norway together. And then a bunch of the others were in like South America, some in Africa. Um, but South America, Africa, it's known as places that are relatively easy to find converts. People are Christian, they're, seeking a little bit more generally. They're more faith-based. Europe, not so much. And certainly, I like to say that there was not product market fit in Ukraine. Going to people who were under the Soviet Union, where religion was in most cases literally illegal, 20 years ago, and then trying to be like, hey, I, represent a church that's headquartered in the United States, and we don't believe in drinking or smoking or premarital sex. Like, how does that sound to a random Ukrainian? Not great is the answer most of the time. Um, so yeah, we did a lot of um, I mean, there were every missionary that serves in Ukraine, there's periods of months or sometimes even, a year or more where you literally don't talk to really any moderately interested person. So I mean, and it depends on kind of what city you're in. So one city I was in, a little mining town called Makievka, you know, your schedule is very regimented. So you're out the door at 9 a.m. You have a 1 hour for a lunch/dinner, and you're back home at 9 p.m. And you're out preaching or serving or teaching English or whatever during those times. So it's pretty discouraging to be like working that hard, knocking on doors, stopping people in the street, and not like, and zero receptiveness whatsoever. Um, and so I kind of went through a cycle where like at first it's like, well, you know what, I'm going to work harder than everybody else, and therefore I'm going to find success that way. Um, but I think one of the things it teaches you really well is to focus on the inputs more so than the outputs. Because whether or not you're going to stumble, and I ended up, just randomly, you know, converted or baptized a few people into the church. My companionships baptized three people during the time I was there. But it was not because like some of the best missionaries, the hardest working people, literally didn't find anyone the entire 2 years. And so you can imagine how discouraging that would be to 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. be spending all day every day trying to talk to people. And I mean the numbers don't show the result. Um, but what you learn is, I can't control who I'm going to run into. I can't control, um, in a startup, you have a little bit more control over what the message is. And, frankly, if I were if the church were my startup and I was trying to make it work in Ukraine, I would pivot and listen to consumer feedback a little bit more. But given that that's not an option, you just learn to keep going and not stop. So you become, in a funny way, it causes you to focus on yourself even more than you would otherwise. And common saying in the church is like, there are a bunch of different ways to say it, but the mission is more about the missionary than the people that they're finding. Like it's a self-discovery and self-improvement process as much as anything. But yeah, you learn to set long-term goals, to focus on inputs, to become a little bit stoic and control. I mean, sometimes you're not as stoic as you should be, but you try to control what you can control and accept that there are things that are outside of your control. So yeah.
Cool, man. And oh, by the way, I forgot to say this at the beginning. If anyone on the call has questions for Austen, you can put them into the chat, or you can also ask to be a panelist and actually come on camera and ask the question too. Um, I want to kind of pull on that a little bit more. So like growth hacking, right? Kind of like making something work. We have a core value at ZayZoon called hustle, which isn't just about like working hard. It's about finding, you know, interesting ways to solve problems. It's about having ingenuity in your approach to things. I really like attribute it to like that growth hacking metric. Um, can you maybe, because I know that, you know, growth hacking is like something that you're very focused on or have been very focused on. Can you explain for everyone how you think of growth hacking? And then do you think that um, you had those innate abilities of growth hacking growing up that helped you feed into, you know, your journey as a entrepreneur, or do you think that there was, you know, a light bulb moment um, in that missionary or elsewhere that sort of fed to that that growth hacking ability?
Yeah, so I think um so first and foremost, when I think of growth, I think of like what motivates people, what excites people, how do you cause somebody to do the thing that you need them to do. And depending on, for us, I need a student to enroll, I need a student to learn, I need a student to apply for jobs, I need a student to, how do you influence people to have them do the behavior that you would have them do. um and then the growth hacking aspect of that is, how do you identify what that message is and then touch the right person at the right time with the right message. And that kind of, it grew out of when I was younger. I was always building stuff, whether it was websites or, everyone has their little, um, I guess not everybody, but you have your little entrepreneurial ventures when you're a kid. And for a long time I felt like I could build really cool stuff, but then it's just like, how do you get it out there? How do you get people to hear about it? And so I was a little bit obsessed with like just the process of, I'll call it driving traffic. So, there's a time when I would just set up like random, and this is, when you're a kid, so you have more time to experiment, but just like a random web page and just be like, okay, how can I, put something on this page that I can make 1 million people a day see? That's an interesting like thought experiment, because what do you have that's interesting enough for anybody to want to look at? But then let's say you find something interesting, how do you get people to see it and get it to a scale where it's not like, just family and friends kind of thing. um and so that led me to,
What were some of those early things that you experimented with?
I would build like, little news sites, or some of my earliest experience was, I was, an early eBay seller. And like as a kid, that was one of the few places that you would be taken seriously, because you're just an account. That's why I love the internet. You could act like an adult and be treated like an adult. If you're doing stuff in person, then it's quite a bit harder. Um, but you have no capital, you have no money, you have no influence, you have no, you can't like go buy product, so you just have to figure stuff out. But one of the things that I found out way back in the day is eBay's search was very, very rudimentary. So it was basically exact match against the item title, and that's it. So, and there was no help beyond that. They had categories, but that was basically it. So if you would, as an example, search for iPod, there would be like 80 million results, and eBay would just display, hey, there's 80 million results. Here they are. It wouldn't say like, do you want to be a little bit more specific, or what do you want to do here? Um, but when you were selling an item, when you were listing it, you would just, it didn't really help you there either. You could list it however you wanted. So the people that didn't know how eBay worked would just type in like iPod and have a picture of their iPod with no description and be like, all right, let's see what it sells for. And nobody would ever find it, because if you search for iPod, you get 80 million results. So you're going to narrow it somehow. So I had like 5-page long search queries, and I would just search for iPod and then negate out every other possible search term to find just the people who listed stuff as iPod. And you could pick those up for $50 and then get them shipped to you and list them right and sell them for 300. So that was awesome as a kid. And you weren't adding any value really, other than being able to like correctly use an eBay listing and ship stuff back and forth. And sometimes people would be mad and just refuse to, like, yeah, this iPod sold for $25, but that's BS. I'm not giving it to you. Um, but then, yeah, so as I like got into that world, that kind of ventured into more like SEO as it was starting, early Google, I mean, Alta Vista and Lycos used to be like incredibly easy to, it was just like, how many times is that keyword repeated on the page? So, okay, I'll just repeat that keyword 80 million times at the bottom of the page, and then I'll shoot to the top of Alta Vista. It's the dumbest, algorithm ever. Um, but yeah, then that leads you into, if you're trying to figure out how to like break those systems, pretty soon you learn that some of the best people in the world at that stuff are like the Nigerians selling illegal prescription drugs on these crappy little websites, and weight loss pills, and the product's obviously garbage, but those, pound for pound, those are some of the best marketers you'll ever meet. Those spammers, to be able to get something that's so generic and so seemingly scammy in front of a lot of people and make money from it is actually really hard. So for lack of product, they had to find different ways to succeed. So I learned a lot from watching and interacting with those folks, the spammers of the world. I never like got very deep into it. I liked the idea of it, but my intention was always to like, if that works for diet pills, surely you could do it for something more legitimate and like make people happy instead of rip them off. And but the same principles generally apply.
How do you think of, like you said something interesting there? You kind of have a thought experiment of how could I get something in front of a million eyeballs. Um, how do you think of building a niche business or like a niche startup and kind of kerneling out versus the diet pills of the world where it's a spray and pray and they're going for everyone? Because I think like the former is sort of the more accepted play, right? But I'm just curious how you think of that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's easier. It's much easier to start with a small audience in a very specific use case. So, as an example, one that I just thought of randomly, the reason we were named Lambda School before a trademark lawsuit forced us to change our name, is the original vision, dramatic vision for what became Lambda School was just like, hey, let's teach a course on Haskell, which is a programming language based on the Lambda calculus. It's purely functional, and it's a very, very tiny community. So my buddy who I was working with was very, very into Haskell. And I was like, you know what? I bet if you want to, and he was, he had a mountain of student debt that he was trying to pay down. He went to law school and graduated in 2008 and like couldn't get a job. So he taught himself to code, and fell in love with Haskell along the way. And so I was like, if you want to teach a Haskell course, I'm sure I can get people like interested. And so you started searching and researching. I was more of a Lisp guy myself, but it's adjacent to Haskell. Um, but pretty quickly you find there are like 200 people in the world who absolutely adore Haskell more than anything on the planet. And if you do anything that's related to Haskell and they hear about it, they will all buy it just out of like love for Haskell and like sheer support. So that's what we did. We had a course that was like, hey, we're gonna teach people Haskell, and everybody that bought it was like obsessed with Haskell already and already knew everything that we taught, because the only people who were a little bit interested in Haskell were extremely interested in Haskell. But and then from there we kind of said, okay, like that worked really well. Like we can get people interested in learning to program this esoteric language, but that's not really interesting. What's really interesting to me is like how do you like use that to provide value? How do you like produce value out of writing code? Like, well, you either build a product or you get a job. Like, what if we just became really good at helping people learn to code enough to get a job? And a lot of iteration and talking to users later, that became Lambda School, and then of course now Bloomtech. Um, but yeah, it's a lot easier when you start with a really niche audience. When I worked on stuff like news websites, it's honestly harder because it's like, who is interested in this particular event that's happening right now? I don't know, some random people. And so it's actually a lot harder. You have a bigger audience, but it's a lot harder to target, and it can be a lot more expensive too when you're scaling out. Like if you look at the highest like total overall CAC. So I guess there's two ways to look at it. So if you, I don't know if this is true anymore, but for a while, the most expensive term on Google was mesothelioma, which is a rare form of cancer that mostly occurs when you come in contact with asbestos. And the reason it was such an expensive keyword on Google is because if you had mesothelioma, a lawyer could show up with you to a class action lawsuit and get paid 50 grand. So mesothelioma lead was worth like $1,000. Just the, someone being interested enough in mesothelioma to look at it was, that's pretty niche. Most people don't care about mesothelioma unless either they've been affected by it or know someone who's affected by it. And some of the companies that have like the net highest user acquisition cost, like the Ubers of the world, had an outrageously high like customer acquisition cost, because it's like, who needs Uber? I don't know, people that like need transportation and stuff. So you can target events, you can target college campuses, but after that you're just like, I don't know, go after everybody, I guess, and we'll see what happens. So it's yeah, in many ways it's harder. Obviously, the market's really big if you're Uber or Facebook, but that causes a different type of user acquisition challenge where it's so broad that it's really difficult to target.
What's a so I'd like to go into like the Lambda School slash Bloom Tech, Bloom Tech journey. Talk to me a little bit about like your initial acquisition of users or students. How'd you go about that? Like, what did that hustle look like? And when did you know like, okay, I think there's some product market fit here, and like it's time to pour some money on that. Like it's time to pour some gas on that fire. And like, what were the scalable processes that kind of fed into that?
Yeah, so I mean, originally when I started, it sounds crazy to talk about that $120 million in VC raised later, but I was not interested in raising VC. Like I was like, this is going to be a little bootstrapped company that me and my co-founder are going to run. And literally, we started looking at it, and I moved to San Francisco from a small town in Utah, and yeah, as you mentioned, lived in my car and all of that stuff. And I was like, that's a big it's a big ask for most normal people, because all the time people would be saying, how did you do that? What did you do? I'm going to do just what you did. And I'd be like, no, you're not. Like, you and your spouse and 3 kids are not going to go live in a car in San Francisco. That's not the answer for you. So originally we just said, you know what, let's just put a really good computer science education on the internet. And is going to date me a little bit, but Slack and Zoom were kind of the new hot thing at the time. And you're like, actually, I bet you could like teach people just in Slack and Zoom. And because before that, if you would try to build like a virtual education company, it'd be like, all right, let's build a video server, and then let's build a learning management system, and then we'll roll our own video storage, and now we can start to like teach people. And so a lot of them ended up being like, here's a bunch of videos, good luck. And that's just not, it's not going to work. Um, so I was like, you know what, let's just do everything live and interactive. So just the same as a live school would be, but then that gives us more reach. We'll have a lower cost for footprint. Because if you looked at, code schools or universities, a lot of their cost was buildings, and then you could only target people in a specific geographic area. So you had to get exactly 30 people in that building at exactly that time, or your costs are out of control. And I was like, yeah, and then we'd be able to like do it at a lower price. And originally it was like, let's only charge $10,000 for it, and we'll train 50 people a year. So I only have to go like call it 15 people every quarter, and we'll do a 3-month course, and we'll each take home $250,000 a year, and that's it. And we were well on the way to doing that. You do learn that it kind of sucks to have a full-time school of just 2 people. There's no such thing as like vacation or break if you're all there is. Margins were awesome. And then as we were talking so the very earliest version of that, the way I think about it is who is the audience, and how like narrowly can we define that audience. So it started by saying, well, obviously it's people who are looking to learn to code. And then you say, okay, well, where do people who are looking to learn to code congregate, and how can you get in touch with a lot of them in some way? And I think of it in like, how can you not just like, spam people? How can you provide a lot of value to that community such that you gain trust, and they want to hear from you? And when that's true, yeah, you can totally sell stuff on the other side. But like one mental model of it is like, how can you just become a rock star in that community? So I went to the Learn Programming subreddit. I sorted by the top posts of all time, and I saw that like the top 15 posts ever were like, here's a bunch of free resources on how you can learn to code. And I was like, well, what if we did something even cooler than that? What if we said, hey, we're going to teach a bunch of people to, obviously we're not going to spend like 1,000 hours teaching you to do this, but we'll get you up to speed on the basics and give you the rest. And we're going to do it completely for free. And we didn't even have really a brand name or a website or anything yet. It was just like, hey, here's a type form page, and anybody who fills this out, wherever you are, whoever you are, we're going to see how far we can teach you. We're going to teach 2 or 3 times a week and get as many people as we can to learn to code as much as we can. And I mean, it sounds crazy now, but like literally on the first thing we ever did, we had like 8,000 people showing up to a live class, and it was like, oh shoot. And everyone was like, well, what are your plans for this? And I was like, I don't know. My co-founders taught at a bunch of code boot camps before. We really want to put a better code boot camp online, so you don't have to move somewhere. And instantly like 100 people were like, yeah, I'm in. Like, how much is it? We're like, I don't know, like 7-10 grand. Like, yeah, we're in. Send us an invoice and just teach us. I'm like, oh shoot, like that's okay, Ben, you need to quit your job now. So it was that sudden. And then the model that we're known for now is really just we continued to teach free classes just because it was something we love to do. And obviously it helped user acquisition on the side. And it's a different level of, you can spin up a landing pages and point paid ads to it. But when you're spending like an hour, face to face with somebody, talking to them, and then at the end they ask a bunch of questions about your school. Like it's just a very effective way to build a relationship, build trust, for them to see that you're for real and not a scammer and whatever else. Um, and so it'd be like, yeah, just, everybody pay $10,000. And then everybody would be like, yeah, that's awesome. I just don't have $10,000. That's the entire reason I'm trying to like change my career. And I was like, that makes a lot of sense. Um, and so I went around and talked to the other code schools and said, like, what do you do about people that don't have money? And they're like, nothing. They're not your audience. Your audience is people who want to learn to code in 3 months who have $10,000. I was like, well, I don't, it's really hard to get people there in 3 months because I want to go a lot deeper. And nobody that I'm talking to has $10,000. There's got to be a better way. And so right before that, I'd worked in lending. So I was, thinking a lot about pooling risk and, how do you manage different risk profiles? And there's kind of some financial wizardry where you can take a bunch of, medium risk stuff. And if you compile it all together, then net, it becomes very low risk. Um, in ways that can either help you out a lot or create a 2008 housing bubble, depending on how confident you are. But I was like, look, let's say we take a cohort of 100 students, I have no idea how many of them are going to get jobs. I mean, at the time we had no idea, right? We'd never gone all the way through. But surely we can, have enough of them to, that if we said, hey, if you get hired, you're going to pay us $20,000. Everyone's like, yeah, sure. If I get hired, you can charge me whatever I want because I'll have a software engineering salary and whatever. I was like, okay. Well, then we could either, have a cohort of like 10 people and charge them $10,000 each and make $100,000. Or we could have kind of a blended cohort where a couple people will pay up front, we'll make $20,000, and we'll have 48 other people in the school where if they're successful they pay $20,000. Then you're like, holy smokes, that could be like 10 times the size of revenue if we do a really good job. And then the more you think about that, you're like, oh, that actually is pretty cool. The way it aligns incentives that, our job is to help you get a job, and we can pool the risk because we're just two idiots who don't, need any money. And uh and yeah, Lyman School was born out of that. Like, hey, what if the school held all the risk? And over time, surely you'd be able to better identify which students are going to be successful, and you'd be better and better over time at helping them get jobs. Um, and to this extent that now we have a tuition refund guarantee where if you look for a job and don't find one, not only do we forgive any tuition that you would have owe us, but we actually write you a check. We like give you 10% of tuition out of our own pocket. And that very rarely happens because if it's more symbolic than anything, because if you look for a job, we can help you find one. In most instances. So yeah, it makes sense and it aligns incentives. And I've been rambling for a minute now, so I'll stop. But yeah.
No, man. No, dude, it's I love it. Do you think why do you think you didn't want to build a big company at first? So I was the same way. Like I remember the first business plan for ZayZoon. It was like, oh yeah, we're gonna grow this to a $10 million company, and we're all gonna own, 30% of that, and we're gonna take home a few $1 million, and wow, that's gonna be amazing. And
Yeah.
then I guess it just sort of builds on itself, and over time you wake up and you've raised all this dough. But I'm curious, like, why do you think you had that mindset to begin with? And then like clearly you had the get up and go to Silicon Valley, and you wanted more than I think like the, you know, 30, 40, $50,000 job that I had heard you talked about in your small town of Utah. But like how did you kind of, I guess, go from yeah, accepting we're not going to do much with this to oh my gosh, like there's a big opportunity here? Was it just
Yeah.
the demand from the customers, or was there like a mindset shift?
Yeah, there are a few times that were pivotal along that journey. So first I'd worked with a company before that was on the cusp of raising a Series A from this billionaire that had done all the docs, everything was all set for raising this round, and basically the billionaire had some personal stuff happen and pulled out and killed the company like literally 2 days before sending the wire. And so I was like, okay, that sucks. Like, I'm never gonna be put in that situation again. I'm gonna control my own destiny. Um, and so that was the first, why I was just like, so, you can find ample stories of how there's bad stuff that happens when you raise money from VCs, and it's much more complex and complicated. And I was like, I'll just avoid all that. I'll live a simple life and I'll pay myself $500,000 a year. Sounds good. Um, and the first time, so the first time I realized we were onto something really special was, we had that list of, 8,000 people who had signed up for the first, free class. And we would work that email list and just be like, hey, do you guys want to like come to the full school and pay us, a bunch of money? And every time we did that, we'd get a couple people who were like, you know what? Yeah, I love that class. Well, let's give it a shot. I've been looking around at schools. This is legit. Um, and then it was eating me, like I couldn't sleep at night for a couple of weeks because I was like, okay, I know what, now that we've gone through a cohort or two of this, I know what you can actually teach in 3 months. Like if someone's grinding basically 24/7. And I know what I would have expected if I were going to hire a software engineer. And the people who are grinding really, really hard for 3 months, you physically cannot fit what I would expect a software engineer to understand into those 3 months. Like that feels very fundamentally broken. Where's all the computer science stuff? Where's understanding of complex systems and operating systems and algorithms and data structures? Like it doesn't fit. So I was like, okay, well, Ben, I want to do something that's way longer than 3 months. And we can do that because we're online and we have it's just us. We can do whatever the hell we want. Um, and that might make it a little bit more expensive, but I think the outcomes would be good enough that if people understood that, it would offset. Um, and then we had a couple people who were like, hey, I'd love, here's my portfolio of stuff I've been coding on the side. I'm really serious about this. I've been to all the free classes. I just don't have enough money up front. Could I pay you a small deposit and then pay you the rest after you're hired? And I was like, you know what? We need to do that. That's crazy. And there's, one particular student who I was like, you know, I would honestly let them in on a scholarship probably, but I love the notion of like, hey, we're gonna put our money where our mouth is for this person, and I'll bet on this person, and make sure that works. And then as you zoom out a little bit, it's like we really should be able to do that for everybody. So I sent an email to the whole list of like 8,000 people, and I was like, hey, look, we're thinking of doing this thing that's longer, it's deeper in computer science. And you don't have to pay anything until you get hired, making more than 50K a year on the other side. And it was like 2,000 of the 8,000 people I had emailed applied. I was like, okay, that's something, when we're used to getting like an application or two every time I send an email, and then you get thousands, like that's pretty hard to ignore. Um,
Was that like the point of when you're like, okay, we're going to raise some venture capital for that, or had you already raised? What was kind of the
so
timeline there?
Yeah, I mean, we were still bootstrapped at the time, so there's still enough people paying up front that me and my co-founder could cover our own salaries. But it was really like we have to reject a whole lot of people who would want to do it because we can't, the two of us can't handle 2,000 people. We can't even handle 100 people between the two of us. And so eventually, I was talking to some friends who had Y Combinator companies, and they're like, just apply to YC, see what happens. And we were like on the bubble of bubbles. We had an interview. They do like a pre-interview if they're like not sure if they want to fly you out to what was that, Mountain View, to do the full YC interview. So I don't know if they want to spend $100 on plane tickets and hotels. Um, and so we had the pre-interview and we passed that, I guess. And when I lived in San Francisco, so they didn't have to pay for anything. So then they invited us to the full interview. We did our full interview. We went into Palo Alto and ordered a pizza, and they called us and like, hey, we need you to come for another interview. We're still not quite sure. Like, this means you're on the bubble. We're not going to lie to you about that. We just can't get our heads around if you're yet another code boot camp and there's a million of them, or if there's something actually unique there. So we went back in, we did another interview, and they're like, okay, stay here, but we'll let you know in a couple hours if you're in or not, because usually they call you, but in this instance, they're like, we'll just tell you because you have to stay for another interview. They came back and got us in a couple hours, like, actually, we want to interview you guys again. We're still not sure. We did that interview, and they're like, all right, and we'll just like, we'll talk amongst ourselves, and then we'll just, come out in like 20 minutes and tell you whether you're in or not. And they came out in 20 minutes, like, we need one more interview. So we went back and we interviewed with YC like 5 times in a day, and it was exhausting. And there are different partners at different parts of it. And then after that one, they're like, we still can't decide. So like, just go home and we'll call you, basically. So we're like, okay. And then I was thoroughly convinced we weren't going to get in, because why else would they not say like, okay, you're in, or, like we were clearly on the bubble. But yeah, they called us. And they're like, you know what, we want to take a, like, this is not the way it normally works, but we want you to do IC. And so we're like, okay, like we'll have through about the middle of YC, we were still cash flow positive because we still had enough people signing up and paying up front, and it was just the two of us still. And we weren't even paying ourselves a salary, honestly. It was all just sitting in this bank account that just kept getting bigger, and our personal savings were going to zero. But the company, we were like, the company's doing awesome. That's the important thing. And then I had a meeting with one of our YC partners, Jeff Ralston. You do office hours weekly in YC. He was like, okay, so what's the plan for how you're going to grow this? Because he knew that people were beating down our door, begging to get in the school. And we're like, yeah, we're going to do a cohort of 50. And 6 months later, we're going to do another cohort of 50. And when you talk to someone who's used to high growth startups like that, like, he must have thought that was the dumbest thing he'd ever heard. And he was like, what's stopping you from doing another cohort like 3 months actually, what's stopping you from doing cohort next month? What's stopping you from doing another cohort of people tomorrow? I was like, well, here's the thing. If we did another cohort, we would have to hire another person. And if we hire another person, I've run the numbers, and if 0% of our engineers get hired, or everybody decides not to repay, like, we would have to pay that person more than what YC has given us. So we can't, we couldn't get everybody to graduation. And that's like not, yeah, as a school, that's something you have to take very seriously and think about and make sure there's always enough to get everybody to graduation in worst case scenario. He's like, well, won't demo day happen by then? And I was like, well, yeah, demo day will happen, but what if we won't be able to raise any money at demo day? And he was like, you guys are like, it shows you something
Yeah, it's like
about our
it's like
level.
just by being a YC company, you
Our
raise and
level,
inflate. Yeah.
yeah, our level of risk aversion, I guess. And the reason we were like, hey, let's start a school that mitigates risk for people. And he's like, okay, if you can't raise any money after demo day, and we had no context, he's like, I will personally give you $250,000 just to make sure that you can teach out. Go, for the love, start another cohort next month. Of course, within like 2 days after demo day, we'd raised $3.5 million. But I didn't know that was going to be the case. So we were trying to
Yeah,
be
yeah.
really, really smart. And then you realize that actually, if this model works, you can grow the number of students, and the revenue might be delayed, but oh my gosh, that's so worth it. Like, you're trading huge amounts of growth for slight dilution. So, and then we actually like the I like walked into our YC. I went up to Jeff after that, and we'd found another way to bring in more upfront revenue. So I was like, we don't need to do demo day, Jeff. We're totally good. He's like, what the hell do you mean you're not going to do demo day? That's like half of the point of YC. All the investors are there. And I was like, no, I don't think we need to raise. And because if we just grow this really, really slowly, we can just cash flow the whole thing. He's like, okay, well, walk me through that model. And it's like, okay, 4 years from now, we could be doing $3.5 million in revenue. We would own all of the company, and all we have to do is just keep doing what we're doing and keep hitting the same hiring rates, the same graduation rates, put a little cushion for bumps along the road. And he's like, okay, and what if you raised $1 million and you started cohorts much more often, and you grew a little bit faster. And so, I literally modeled it out on a spreadsheet, and I was like, oh, actually, we could be doing like 25 times as much revenue at that time. It's like, okay, and you would be diluting yourself like 20%. And so you're turning down 20% dilution, and you think that you can grow 25 times faster. It's like, do you understand how math works? Like, think about this, I was like, yeah, okay, that's fair. So that's actually the way we decided to raise, is we modeled it out and said, okay, definitely we would be able to grow so much faster that it would, be worth the dilution.
And then fast forward, and Bloomtech's raised like 120 million and
Yeah.
like gone through this like
Yeah. I mean,
crazy up and down. And dude,
yeah,
I like, I want to get into it so bad, but I also want to make sure that I address some of the questions from
for
panelists,
sure.
or from the Q&A too. So maybe I'll pass it to Daniel um, for a question.
Sure, yeah. Hi, Austin. Thanks for spending the this hour with us. I'm on the development team at ZayZoon, and I've been a software developer for almost 10 years now. And so my question is, over the year, or sorry, not my question. Over the years, I've worked with a variety of developers, both coming from coding boot camps as well as traditional four-year university or college education. So my question is, how do you see coding boot camps fitting into the software development industry compared to a traditional four-year degree?
Yes. I think my opinion on this has somewhat shifted over the years. I think code boot camps really shot themselves in the foot, and um, they had the opportunity to be as important in the industry as a four-year degree, and obviously there are a lot of, number for number, there's probably about as many code bootcamp grads working in tech as there are people with like a formal CS, capital C, capital S computer science degree. Um, but I think boot camps try to go too too short, too fast. They tried to promise too much and deliver too little. And so if you look at, 5 years ago as an example, you could take the top 50% of your class and you could get them to a point where they could eke their way into a paying role in 3 months. Um, but that only worked for people who are extremely dedicated and worked very hard and usually had a little bit of engineering background of some sort. Um, and all of those schools would try to be like, yeah, we're equivalent to a computer science degree. And it fundamentally was not, right? Like, not in the depth of the curriculum, not in the number of hours spent coding, not in the, and, people tried to be accepting of alternatives to, a traditional four-year program. And there are a lot of phenomenally successful engineers that came out of that, but risk adjusted for the student, would you be better off? It was a little bit of a toss up, right? Like, especially when you factor in, if you ignore the time component, right? Like, the big trade off that people struggle to recognize is that a four-year degree is a really long time. If you went to a year-long code boot camp and then you did 3 years in the industry, you're going to be way better off than someone who'd spent 4 years in college, as far as your technical ability goes. But I think basically, I think everything went too short. The user acquisition got too intense, and so in the early days, you could teach people to code in 3 months if they came in. Like, the bar for code boot camps in the very early days used to be like, yeah, you have to be really good at JavaScript to like join this code boot camp. And then give that a couple of years, and it was watered down into like, yeah, anybody who's ever turned on a computer before, we can teach you to become a software engineer in 10 weeks. It's like, no, you fundamentally cannot. So I see us moving even further away from that. I think in the near future, most of our programs are going to be a year or longer, which is that's comparable in the amount of time you actually spend writing code. We don't have 2 years of generals, right? But the computer science portion of the computer science degree, it'll be roughly equivalent to, and obviously less context switching and more, practical. So there are differences there. But I think that's what code boot camps could have become if there wasn't. That's what they would be today if there hadn't been such a race to the bottom for let's drop the price so that we can get more customers. And so to do that, we have to move our program from 12 weeks to 10 weeks. It should have been going the other way. It should have been going from 12 weeks to 40 weeks. But then your market goes away because you have to charge $20,000 up front, and people don't have $20,000 up front. So there's a little bit of a chicken and egg problem. But yeah, I think fundamentally code boot camps is a very long-winded way to say I think code boot camps are too short.
I'm gonna pass it to Christian, who's ZayZoon's resident code boot camper. And just for context, Austin, so we're a team of 110 now, 115. And Christian, when did you come on board, ZayZoon? Christian, maybe give a bit of your background with Lighthouse Labs too.
Yeah, I took a boot camp, joined another startup, and then joined with ZayZoon when we were around 20, 25 people. And yeah, I've moved along, learned a lot, helped the team a lot. The question I have is, because I get a lot of juniors reaching out and I chat with them and they're always like, how do I get into tech? So the question I have is, what would you say is the number one advice you would give people from boot camps or self-taught on how they can stand out among all the other people that want to get into tech? Because that's the question I have the hardest time answering and giving good guidance on.
Yeah, I think the number one piece so there are the things that you must do, and then there are the things you have to do to stand out. The must do, and I think this is true for anyone who's looking to get into software engineering. Like the job search process is actually one of the most important parts. If you're if you're gonna submit resumes to Google and Facebook and Apple and then go click LinkedIn one apply on 500 different companies, you may as well not waste your time, right? So the best way to get a job is by networking, building real relationships with people, letting them get to know you and build some trust. And that's something that is harder to do, and it's not an easy one button solution. But that's like how you actually get the job, is that. And then how do you stand out amongst the other candidates? It really comes down to two things. One is portfolio, like build actual shipped products that work, and I don't care if they can transact money necessarily, but someone who's never touched your app should be able to come in and you actually use it and see all of the code and see that you know what you're doing, and get it off of the freaking Netlify domain names, and you know what I'm saying? Like make it legit, make it a real product. And then the other one is data structures and algorithms. Like it's one thing to be able to spin up, a little Rails app or a JavaScript app. It's another thing to understand what's actually happening under the hood. And I know that people hate, leak code style interviews, but there's a reason people use them. And getting good at those really does work. Both, to understand data structures and algorithms more deeply, but also to interview. So, look, there's a lot I would change about tech interviewing, but the reality is it's going to be a leak code challenge 99% of the time. So get really good at those. So yeah.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks, Austin. And it looks like we got time probably for one more question here. Ash, do you want to go?
Yeah, thanks, Tate. Thanks, Austin. A lot of high schools are really investing in STEM programs or even younger. I was just wondering if you're working on any type of mentorship for younger generations through schools.
Yeah, so we had a really good part. We did a couple of things that I think have been impactful there. We're still looking at different and better ways to get more involved there, because that's obviously you know, as we talked about before, that's our future target audience. But we sponsored an organization called Hack Club, which is one of the biggest computer science learning organizations. And then we do a lot of stuff with and for, and our investors, I guess, are the brother of the folks who run code.org. And so their mission is to get computer science into every classroom in the US. So we'll do a bunch of, you know, free classes with them. We do a lot that's open source and available to anyone. So we have a lot of free courses and stuff. We haven't, for regulatory reasons, we haven't gone down the route of, hey, let's make us teaching 16 and 17-year-olds a mainstay of what we do. It gets a lot more tricky when you involve minors and, you know, all of that stuff is a little bit outside of our wheelhouse. But yeah, those are the main things we do. We're huge fans of Hack Club and code.org.
Awesome. Man, I want to chat with you longer. Thanks so much though, dude. That's awesome. Yeah, I'm gonna reach out to you for a founder to founder chat on the money raising journey and the, you know, layoff journey and the 0 to 1 startup journey. I know that you say that you like love that 0 to 1 phase, maybe more so than the later stage. I feel very similar in many
I
ways.
just don't like big companies where you're spending all your time managing people instead of I want to build stuff, not like deal with people. But yeah, there's a lot of learnings there.
Yeah. I feel that. I feel that. Cool, man. Well, thank you so much, and I know the team's super appreciative of it. And yeah, thanks, Austen.
Yeah, it's good to meet you all.
Take care, man.
We'll see you.